My name's Kyle, and I have the privilege to serve as the lead pastor at Trinity Church in Florissant. Welcome to Trinity Online. I don't know what week this is, but it's becoming a new normal for us. But hope is coming that we will be together sooner than later. We're beginning to prepare and plan for that, and we'll have more details that will be coming to you soon. But right now we find ourselves once again here on the screen. But I'm thankful that there isn't anything that can keep us from gathering together. If you have been joining us, you know the routine, you know the drill. At this time, if you haven't already, would you just comment below that you are joining us? We've had several of our foreign exchange students who have been with us over the last couple of years, or even more recently, the last couple of semesters, who have been joining with us. And so just a shout out to you guys. I'm so thankful that you are joining with us, and hopefully these messages have been helpful to you during this time. If you're new with us, maybe you've been connecting over the last few weeks through our church online. I'm thankful that you've been doing that. Hopefully you've had the feeling, even though we haven't been collectively gathering, just through teachings, that Trinity is a place where you could belong even before you believe. That once we gather back together in this building, we would love to have you join us if that's possible. If you want to continue to watch online, that's okay. We're glad that you're connecting with us. But just know that Trinity is doing all we can to be the kind of people where anyone could walk into this building and belong. That there's no prerequisites, there's no ideas of who you need to be a part of our community. I'm thankful to pastor a church that is taking on that kind of mindset. We come together, we doubt, we struggle, we wonder, and that's okay. Well, today would typically be our graduation Sunday. It would be the time where we recognize those fifth graders who are moving into our youth group, those high school graduates who have reached such an important milestone in their life and graduate high school, and recognize them as they move forward into new things, and then our college graduates who have accomplished so much and now are moving into some new things. And I wish we were gathered to celebrate, but we're still in these moments going to celebrate them. Here in just a moment, our children's director will talk about those fifth graders, but we at Trinity just believe in and support our young people, that we really don't see them as the future. We think they are important to what God is doing here and now. To my high school students and my college graduates, I believe in you and support you. You have done incredible things. I've watched you grow up, many of you over the last 14 years even, and it's amazing to see your journey in life. I'm excited to see what's next for you. For our high schoolers, as you move into college and pursue what God has put on your heart, continue to pursue what God is wanting you to do. And then to our college graduates who are doing great things, would you continually seek Jesus? Would you see that him living in you will allow you to do great things? That wherever you find yourself in the next phase of life, that serving him and seeking him is what's most important. That you will do well and you will succeed if you're able to do that. And so at this time, our children's director will highlight those fifth graders. There'll be a short little video that will play to highlight those students who are moving from fifth grade into youth group, and then our high school graduates and our college graduates at this time.
Good morning. My name is Lisa Bush, and I serve here at Trinity Church as the children's director. And today is our graduating Sunday, and I am here to recognize 7 of our students who are moving from fifth grade into our youth group. And although I'm sad to see them go, I am super excited for them. Several of them I've had all the way from kindergarten through fifth grade, and the others I've taught for many years, and I've loved them and enjoyed having them as part of Kids Church and a part of our Wednesday night blast group. And as I said, I'm super excited for them. I love watching them grow, and the church is coming alongside these 7 kids and has since dedication on many of them, and we are looking forward to supporting them and loving them, and I'm excited to watch their spiritual journey as they move on to our youth group. And I'm just very excited for them. And I will have a Bible for you that I'll be delivering to you sometime soon in the very near future. So I look forward to seeing you face to face. I can't wait till we're all back together again. But until that time, just know that I love you and I'm excited for you. I'm happy for you. I know you will all do great in our youth group, and I'm excited to watch your journey.
Well, at this time, we're going to move into a time of worship through singing a couple of songs. If you've been with us over the last couple of weeks, you know what this looks like. If you want to just sit and listen as Nathan sings, that's great. If you want to participate by singing, that's wonderful as well. Hopefully, just in these moments, the words of these songs are encouraging to you. Well, I'm going to pray and then we'll sing together. God, I'm so thankful that there is nothing that can stop us from experiencing your presence. That although, Lord, we may be distant from one another in these moments, we are still connected because of you and your Spirit. God, as we move in the direction of turning our attention to you in these moments through music, would you speak to us? Would you encourage us in these moments where we still might be overwhelmed with anxiety and fear and worry of what tomorrow may look like? God, would we seek you? Would we hold on to you? Would we trust in you? God, would you speak to us today as we sing with one another and as we open up your word? We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen and amen. Well, at this time, if you feel comfortable singing along in your home, we would encourage you to do that, or you can listen to these songs.
so divine, demands my soul, my life, my all.
Well, we're in week 5 of our series called Who I Want to Be. If you've been with us, you know that we're not looking at who we want to be in the future in the sense of opportunities or who we want to be in occupation, but we're really looking at the kind of people that we want to be. I was thinking about that this week, and I was thinking about the attributes that we want people to see in us. You know, as a pastor, I do a lot of funerals, and I sit with people as they think about the loved ones that they've lost. And ultimately, the conversations always turn to the kind of person their loved one was. That's what we're looking at. We're looking at this idea of who we want to be right now in the midst of crisis and a pandemic and everything that's going on. We want to pay attention to the kind of people that we are. But ultimately, this is going to end. There's light at the end of the tunnel. We're going to get through this. And at that point, we still want to pay attention to the kind of people that we're becoming. Who are you? Ultimately, who do you want to be? We've looked at over the last few weeks this idea of being a person who was loving. The idea of having joy in the midst of difficult happenings. See, happiness is based on happenings, and so we're not talking about just being a happy person, but how do we experience this real joy in the midst of the things that we go through? We looked at the idea of being a person of peace, and last week, the idea of being a person that has patience. And so this week, we're going to continue, and we're going to look at the topic of kindness. Kindness. The main scripture we're using is Galatians 5:22. If you don't own a Bible, we'd love to get you a Bible. Here on Sundays, when we're in the building, we encourage people to take Bibles as they leave, but we'd love to send you a Bible, so you could message us, you could send us an email. We'd love to be able to get you a Bible if you want a physical Bible. But we're looking at this letter to a group of Christians that a guy named Paul wrote. Paul was a zealous Jewish man. He was doing everything that he thought was right. He was persecuting people who were following Jesus. And then he meets Jesus. He has this encounter with God, and his life is forever changed. He helps other people begin to follow Jesus. And in the midst of that, he plants these churches, and he visits, and he writes, and he tries to help them figure out what it means to follow Jesus. And Paul, although he did that thousands of years ago, what we're reading today was written for us as well. It was written to help us figure out what it looks like to be in relationship with one another. That was a lot of what Paul was talking about. In Galatians, he's talking about what it looks like to live as a free person. A person who has experienced the grace of God. And that how we come to a point where we believe Jesus is enough. And then in chapter 5, he begins to weigh out, when you live according to your flesh and your humanness, there's these things that come from your life. There's these things that show up. And then he says, when we live in the Spirit, something else happens. Let me read it to you. Galatians 5, verse 22. It says this, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law." What Paul is talking about is this supernatural thing that happens in our lives. That God dwells in us, his Spirit is in us, that allows us to have these kind of attributes. Now, let me pause for a moment. I'm not saying, if you're listening today and you would say, look, I don't know if I'm a follower of Jesus, I don't even know if I believe in God. I'm not saying that you can't be a person that's kind. I'm not saying that you can't be a really patient person. That's just maybe part of your personality. But what we've been looking at is possessing all of these attributes, where it becomes a new normal. It defines who we are, and we play a role in this. We have some responsibility as we figure out what it looks like to be loving and to experience joy and patience and peace and kindness. So like we have a responsibility with that, but ultimately it's the Spirit doing something in us. My wife has these plants, peonies, which is like her favorite flower. And for the last several weeks, every day she goes out and she looks at these bushes, and the peonies are taking forever to bloom. And there's only so much that my wife can do. She can make sure they have water, that they're getting sun. She trimmed some bushes away to make sure they were getting the light that they need. And she goes out and she looks at these, and they're slowly beginning to open. But my wife can't rush the process. She can't make them bloom. There's something that's going on behind the scenes that Heather has no control over. The same is true for us. That we submit and believe that the Spirit of God can do something in our life, and then he does. And it's not always something we can put our finger on. It's not always something that we can explain. We just realize that something begins to look different in our lives. We become more loving. We become people of joy. We become people who are more peaceful and more patient. And as we look at today, people who are more kind. Supernaturally, the Spirit of God dwelling in us. And as I talked about last week, and we've looked at in the weeks before this, these are really attributes of God that Paul's not requesting or forcing or believing that we could do something or be something that God isn't already. The requirements and the expectations of us are not something that go beyond who God is. Paul is really pointing and saying, look, you want to know who God is? The Spirit of God, this is who he is. And you too can live in such a way. And so as we've looked at these attributes that are being manifested in us, it's not simply about words. It's not just saying we're these things, but it comes through in our actions. And each week I've just talked about it being like an orange, and hopefully it's connected. Some of you have said it's been helpful to you. But Paul is not saying, look, choose which fruit you want in your life. See, the term he uses is not a plural term. It's not fruits. And we don't get to choose which ones we want to possess. The idea is that we will possess them all. And so just like an orange, if I was to peel this open, there would be pieces of orange in this, but yet it's all one piece of fruit. And I believe that the peel of the orange is like love. When we understand what it means to be loved by God, it allows us to begin to have these other attributes. And so we're not just choosing which one of these we want. We're not going to make excuses and say, look, as today, I'm kind of a rough person. It's hard for me to be kind. No. We don't get to do that, especially if you're a follower of Jesus. There is an expectation that all of these will be produced in our lives. Now, as we go through this one today, to be honest, I feel like this week should be a fairly simple teaching. Maybe the simplest in the series. However, I don't think it's necessarily the easiest to practice all the time. But I think right now it might be one of the things our community needs more than anything else. It's what our country needs and our world needs right now. I think we have a lack of kindness. I think we have a lack of kindness in our world at the moment. So we're going to look at kindness today. We're going to look at what Paul was thinking when he puts kindness in this list of fruit that we would possess and produce. We're going to look at the kindness of God and how we see that lived out in the life of Jesus. We're going to look at a few barriers to kindness and a few ways we begin to show kindness in our lives. As Paul lists the idea or the fruit of kindness, he's not simply saying that you should be a nice person. He isn't saying that we should just avoid conflict at all cost. I don't know if you know this. I found this out in my study and research that November 13th is known as World Kindness Day. I think Paul would say that the fruit of kindness is not meant for one day out of the year. I mean, that's great. I love the idea of everyone on November 13th practicing kindness, but this should be a normal for us. As we talk about a new normal as COVID has hit and moving forward, this should be a new normal for us if it's not been a normal part of our lives. Or maybe you hear people use the term random acts of kindness. We see this online, someone who performs an act of kindness, and in the description, it will have a short little description of what happens, and then right after that, it'll say, "My faith in humanity is restored." There's something about kindness, but I don't think Paul would say that it's random acts of kindness. I remember in college, in our dorm, there was a sign that was put up that said, "Rack Weekend." Kind of caught my attention, didn't know really what that meant, and it said, "We will rack our neighbors." And I thought, okay, I'm going to continue reading, and it said, "We will perform random acts of kindness." And I thought, that doesn't sound very kind, but the idea was we're going to go out and do these random acts, and we come back, and maybe we come back to our normal life, and we just go about our business. I think Paul would say, just like it's not one day out of the year, I think Paul would say that they're not random, that to be kind is not always random. Paul, I believe, is saying that kindness should be something that is regularly produced in our lives. That kindness is this genuine concern for others. It's how we show a real compassion for people. It is the respect for the humanity of others. And this moves us to act and to speak in ways that build others up. And it shows care for their well-being. This is the kind of kindness I think Paul is talking about. See, to be kind is to have this disposition to help others. It is to live in a way that our lives are beneficial to others. That real kindness is a genuine concern for other people. And we know that this kindness is real and true and possible. We know what kindness looks like because it is one of the attributes of God. We see it put on display by God. We know kindness because God is kind. There's a guy named David who in the Old Testament, he writes these prayers, and you can read about him in the Old Testament. The Old Testament is the part of the Bible in the front that is before Jesus comes. It's the story of God in a group of people. David is a part of this story, and David has some moments where he makes some really poor decisions. That's probably an understatement. He's not a perfect person, but he has this relationship with God, and this is what he says about God. Psalm 36:7, he says this, "How priceless is your unfailing love, O God. People take refuge in the shadow of your wings." Now, in this that I just read, it uses the word unfailing love. But in the original language, it would have been translated loving kindness. David knew the kindness of God. David didn't just know the kindness, he had experienced the kindness of God. That even as David made poor choices, the love of God was still pursuing David. The plan that God had for David was still in motion. And David's response is this unfailing love, this loving kindness is priceless. That people take refuge, that when storms hit, when difficult things come up, we find safety in the loving kindness of God. He writes in Psalm 63:3, "Because your love or loving kindness is better than life, my lips will glorify you." David again says, it is better than anything I've ever experienced. That nothing is as good as the loving kindness of God. And therefore my lips will give praise to God. David experienced it. We see Paul, the one who wrote Galatians that we're reading, in Romans 2:1. In Romans 2:1, this is what Paul says. "You, therefore, have no excuse, you who pass judgment on someone else. For at whatever point you judge another, you are condemning yourself, because you who pass judgment do the same things. Now we know that God's judgment against those who do such things is based on truth. So when you, a mere human being, pass judgment on them and yet do the same things, you who think you will escape God's judgment, do you think you will escape God's judgment? Or do you show contempt for the riches of his kindness, forbearance, and patience, not realizing that God's kindness is intended to lead you to repentance? Paul is saying that as you judge others, you will be judged. And he gets to the end and he says, look, it's the kindness of God. Do you understand that it's the kindness of God that leads us back to following him? Eugene Peterson was a theologian, a writer, a teacher. He worked with people who, when they read the Bible, was confused. And I've been at that place for a lot of my own life. And even today, there's times where I have to look to someone else who helps me understand the scriptures. And so maybe you've read the Bible and it's hard for you to understand. Well, he wrote a paraphrase called The Message. And this is how he paraphrases what we just read. He says this: those people who are in a dark spiral downward, but if you think that leaves you on a high ground where you can point your finger at others, think again. Every time you criticize someone, you condemn yourself. It takes one to know one. Judgmental criticism of others is a well-known way of escaping detection in your own crimes and misdemeanors. But God isn't so easily diverted. He sees right through all such smokescreens and holds you to what you've done. You didn't think, did you, that just by pointing your finger at others, you would distract God from seeing all your misdoings and from coming down on you hard? Or did you think that because he's such a nice God, he'd let you off the hook? Better think this one through from the beginning. God is kind, but he's not soft. In kindness, he takes us firmly by the hand and leads us into a radical life change. Oh, let me read that again. God is kind, but he's not soft. In kindness, he takes us firmly by the hand and leads us into a radical life change. I just think about being a dad in those moments where I've been in the store or I've been on the sidewalk walking, and maybe when my kids were little, they were doing something that was maybe harmful or hurtful, or they were doing something they weren't supposed to. And so I would quickly grab their hand. And it wasn't like a let's take a walk grab by the hand. It was a firm grab by the hand, and they would try and let go, and I would hold even more firmly. It wasn't because I was angry at them. It wasn't because I was mad at them. No. It was in loving kindness that I held tightly to them, and I led them back to safety. Paul is saying, have you experienced that as you judge others and you think about what others have done? Paul says, are you thinking about how God is so kind? That it's this kindness that leads us back to a different way of living life. As we see this list of fruit that's produced in our lives, he's not attempting to get us to live into a way, again, that is counter to who God is. And so as he says, this kindness will be produced in your life. It's because God is kind. He says you love one another. Well, why? Because God has loved us. That God is patient with us. That God provides peace for us. So the response, the production of kindness in our life comes because God is kind. Paul's attempting to help the listener then and now to see exactly who God is. These 9 attributes are about God, but can be possessed in our life. Ultimately, as we look at the life of Jesus, kindness is Christ-likeness. To be kind is to be like Christ. If we want to know the character of God, we don't have to look far. We can see it in the life of Jesus. At one point, Jesus tells those who are following him, anyone who's seen me has seen the Father. If you want to know what God the Father is like, look at me, is what Jesus is telling those who are following him. So if you want to know God, we know Jesus. If we want to see who God is, we look at Jesus. And I could simply sit here and I could read story after story in the scriptures that describe the life of Jesus, the interactions that Jesus has with people, where we see this loving kindness that is put on display over and over again. As we see this genuine concern for people, as he puts on display compassion towards someone, where he truly sees someone and he sees their humanity and then speaks words of life to them, as he heals them or provides something for them. There may not be a better spot than John 8, when the religious leaders bring this woman to Jesus. They have caught her in the act of adultery, and they pull her out of this home and they bring her into the presence of Jesus. Now, just for a second, I just want to recognize something in the culture of that day. We see even in these moments that women were viewed differently, that these men looked at her actions as an adulterer differently than the man who was in the same place, but Jesus won't. See, Jesus sees us all in the same likeness. Jesus puts us all on the same playing field. And we're going to see that in the response of Jesus in just a moment. But we see these religious leaders, these teachers of the law, these Pharisees. They catch this woman in the act and bring her into the presence of Jesus. And I get this picture that they're all kind of huddled around this woman who is probably not fully dressed. And I get this picture of this woman full of shame and guilt, with her face downcast, not wanting to look at anyone, not knowing what her future was going to look like, fearing that death was just around the corner. She stands there in the presence of all these men ready to condemn her. And the Pharisees are looking to trap Jesus. They want to know what the response of Jesus is going to be. Is Jesus going to give them permission to stone this woman for adultery? Or is he going to basically play it off as if it's no big deal? And so they ask Jesus what they should do, and then Jesus does this really weird thing. Jesus bends down into the dirt and begins to draw pictures or write words. Nobody really knows what Jesus does in this moment. I won't even begin to pretend that I know. All I know is he writes in the dirt, he stands up and he says, okay, those who are without sin, who are here gathered around this woman and ready to condemn her, ready to stone her, anyone who's never made a mistake, anyone who's never intentionally gone against God, anyone who is without sin, go ahead and throw the first stone. Jesus bends down and he begins to draw in the sand again. Woman in the middle of the crowd, these men holding stones, and the scriptures say that one by one they began to leave. They dropped their rocks and they walked away. And we'll pick it up in John 8, 9 through 11. It says this, at this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left. See, that's a simple line, but Jesus is without sin. Jesus has never made a mistake. So Jesus can stand in this presence, in the presence of this woman, without sin. So technically, according to what he just said, he has the right to stone this woman because he is without sin. Until only Jesus was left, when the woman still standing there, Jesus straightened up and asked her, woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? He looks at this woman, and I get the feeling that maybe she lifts her head. That maybe in this moment she hears the voice of Jesus, and it sounds differently as he calls her woman. Woman, where are those who are going to condemn you? Is there anyone here? And so she looks up and she sees Jesus and she says, no one sir. And Jesus' response is, neither do I condemn you. I see you. I'm going to show loving kindness to you in this moment. He doesn't hold a stone. He speaks words of life to her in these moments. Neither do I condemn you. And then he says, go now and leave your life of sin. Let me just ask a difficult question. If you were in the crowd, where would you find yourself? Would you have been there holding stones, ready to throw them? See, to be kind means that we drop the rocks. To be kind means we don't look to stone people. Yeah, I know today that doesn't happen. We don't physically have rocks. We don't physically stone people, but we do with our words. We do online. We do through gossip. We stone people. We condemn people. We condemn people who aren't like us, who don't believe like us, or maybe who don't vote like you do, or think about things differently. We've got to drop the stones if we are going to be kind. See, what Jesus does here in this moment is brilliant. See, he wins the game. He, in loving kindness, tells the woman, I don't condemn you. But then very quickly he says, go now and leave your life of sin. He doesn't tell the woman, I don't condemn you, continue doing what you've been doing. And maybe she's been put in that position. Maybe it wasn't always by choice. Maybe there's been abuse and power that has played into what's happened in her life. But Jesus in that moment says, you have a different way of living life. You don't have to continue down that path anymore. So in loving kindness, Jesus says, I don't condemn you, and I want to see your life look different. We have got to drop the stones. In kindness, we cannot stone people. And so Jesus responds out of kindness, and again, we see the attributes of God because we see those in Jesus' response. And so just quickly, how do you respond to the idea of God being kind? Like, I lived a life where I wasn't sure about that. And the reason is because I was not very kind to myself. I've lived this life of perfection. I've lived this life of sports. And as good as I was on the field was as good as people would see me. That if I performed well, then people would like me. That I would be accepted and I would fit in. And when I did a good job, people would tell me. And so I felt like the only reason people treated me a certain way is because of my performance. And so I've not been kind to myself. My identity was always found in something. And when I failed, again, I was not kind to me. Anybody with me? Any of you really hard on yourself? You could be kind to everyone else, but you're not kind to you. You're not kind about the way you've parented. You've done your best and you've made mistakes, but you've not experienced kindness to yourself or as a spouse or in your job or at school. Or maybe some of my young people have made mistakes and you feel like you've let your parents down and you have punished yourself. See, when we live this way, there's this overwhelming sense of guilt and shame. I perceived that God was like everyone else, that I had let God down, that when I had made mistakes, God was mad at me, that how could he still want me? And then I experienced it for myself. And something clicked years ago as I was reading this story. And I was looking at this idea of the loving kindness that Jesus shows to this woman. When maybe she had every right to be condemned. She had made a mistake. She had not lived the life that God had wanted her to. But Jesus, in his loving kindness, pulls her face up, pulls her chin up, and looks at her in the face and sees her humanity and says, I don't condemn you. man, something clicked in my heart and in my mind. And that as I had felt I had disappointed people and I had felt like I had disappointed God, something came over me where I believed that God's loving kindness was for me. Can I just encourage you today? It's for you. Maybe you've had a view of God as him being angry or out to get you or catching you doing wrong. That's not who God is. We see that he is a loving, kind God. So what does this mean for us? As I said a minute ago, to be kind is to be like Christ, simple enough, but there's some barriers. There's some barriers to us being kind to one another. 4 of them. 1, it's our busyness. Simply, we're just too busy to show kindness. We see the need of someone. We see the kind thing to do, and we begin to say, I just don't have the time. And I love to be able to serve them or help them. I love to be able to go out and do what needs to be done, but I'm just too busy. And maybe we're not right now, but I think when life gets going again and we get back to our normal, there's gonna be this temptation to fill our schedule with so many things. And busyness will be a barrier to our kindness. As busy as Jesus was, 3 years of ministry really is all that we see. But time and time again, as people come looking for healing, Jesus stops and he sees people and he heals people. Busyness never kept Jesus away from showing loving kindness. If it's not busyness, maybe it's laziness. Look, to be kind takes some energy. Kindness takes action. Maybe we have to go out of our way. We have to leave our comfort zones. See, kindness is not a spectator sport. We can't just sit back and talk about being kind. Kindness means that we take action, that we have to do something. And I could list people after people who I've seen this lived out in their life. Here at Trinity, Mr. Jim, who takes care and loves our 2 and 3-year-olds. Even today, as I shot this video, he came up and was installing some things. And even though he knows he's a higher risk, he's figured out how on Tuesdays and Thursdays when we give out food, and maybe he's not here in the midst of everyone, he comes up and he gets food and he delivers it to families. See, it takes energy, it takes time. But sometimes we're really too lazy. We count the cost and we think, I don't know if it's worth it. I don't know if I want to do that. Or indifference. See, we can't show kindness if we don't care about people. Kindness means that we care. Some of us may see the need of someone around us and we might think, well, it's not my problem. Well, they got themselves into this mess. No. See, if we truly care about people, we'll show kindness towards them. But indifference just means, well, I don't really care. And so indifference will be a barrier to us being kind. Or pride. Pride. It's just who I am. It's just who I am. I'm not a kind person. I'm kind of rough. And so we have this pride that says, I can't change. To be truly kind, we must humble ourselves and see others as God sees them, not simply seeing them with our own eyes of judgment or condemnation. We don't have to prove that we're right. There's a book called Wonder. There's a movie too. I would encourage you maybe to read this with your kids, encourage your kids to read it or watch the movie. There's a line in it. It's probably one of the most famous lines out of the book. And it says this: when given the choice between being right or being kind, choose kind. In our world right now, I feel like too many of us are choosing to be right. We're choosing to be right and not to be kind. I just begin to wonder what Jesus would do. Would Jesus choose to be right or to be kind? See, the brilliant thing about Jesus is he was able to do both. In his loving kindness, he was able to also point to what is right. But too many times, I think we err on the side of being right. And at that point, it's too difficult to then be kind. So what would it look like? Just quickly, what would it look like for us to see the fruit of the Spirit produced in our lives? We talked about this in the beginning, but we have to see that God has been kind to us. So our response is that we should be kind to one another. Look, if you have experienced the kindness of God, it is easier for you to show kindness to others, or it should be. And to who? Who do we show this kindness to? All people. I mean that. Who should we be kind to? All people. Ravi Zacharias, if you don't know who that is, author, speaker, really just a brilliant man who has been saved and rescued and redeemed by God, whose life was radically changed and began to communicate about the ways of God. He right now, even as I record this, is anticipating death. Cancer has ravaged his body, and really at any moment he will go home to experience eternity with Jesus. He says this: to be human is to be created in the image of God. It's what it means to be human. It's what it means to be human. It means that you are created in the image of God. And so the desire to be kind to all people should come from the recognition that all people are created in the image of God. If you've been around this place, we talk about that. You have to see, if you specifically are a follower of Jesus, every person you look at, whether it's through a screen or in person, everyone is created in the image of God. We see this in the beginning of God's story as he created man and woman. He created us in his image. It doesn't say those who follow Jesus are created in the image of God. It doesn't say those who live a certain way are created in the image of God. No. He says all of us are created in the image of God. That's what it means to be human. And so therefore, if we are truly going to believe that, if we truly believe that every person is created in the image of God, it should change how we treat people. It should change how we talk about people. Every person in front of you is created in the image of God. Those you disagree with, you can still be kind to them. Those who vote differently than you can be kind to them. Those who have different life experiences and make different life choices, yes, you can even be kind to them. Kindness to our family, kindness to the stranger, and kindness to our enemies. We see that teaching throughout the scriptures. The teaching of Jesus is to love your enemies, to bless your enemies, to be kind to your enemies. And so what is this going to look like? Well, it's not going to be random. We're not just going to do random acts of kindness. We're not going to, or I should say we're not going to. The hope is that we won't just one day a year be kind, but we will actively seek out ways to be kind. That God begins to do something in us where we desire to look for the needs around us. That we should be creative. That it can be simple. It can be simply a smile or a wave. It could be speaking to someone. It could just be acknowledging someone's existence who others often look past. See, being kind doesn't always mean financial. Being kind doesn't always mean buying something or giving someone money. It doesn't have to cost you anything. Really, all it costs you is your pride and your time and your energy. It means that you will see others on the same level as yourself. It means that you will live a life that is selfless. It's much easier to be selfish, that we will only concern ourselves with us, but to be kind means that we will live a life where we look at others' needs often before we look at our own. There's this great story that came out in 2016. This lady, this grandma, was texting her family and friends and inviting them to Thanksgiving dinner, and she accidentally texted a 17-year-old boy. And he responded, who is this in your picture? And grandma sends picture to this young man, and the young man sends a picture back and says, look, I'm not your grandson. And so they have this interaction, and then he ends with this. I know you're not my grandma, but can I still get a plate though? And in 2016, she invites this young man to participate in their Thanksgiving dinner. Kindness, simple, but it didn't stop there. They continued this relationship, and now they have this friendship, and since then they've had Thanksgiving dinner together, 2017, 18, 19. It may have been random in the moment, but it took some intentionality afterwards. It took action. It took seeking out a relationship with this young man. It was kindness. And we see it happening all around us. But what could happen if it just became normal? What could happen if it wasn't something that gets put online, but it's really something we experience daily by those around us, that we would put into practice loving kindness? See, you will never regret being kind. If you're like me, you've regretted something you've said. Maybe you've started to post something and you posted it and then you quickly deleted it and you regretted who saw it. Listen, you will never regret being kind to anyone. If you want to know what kindness looks like, look to Jesus. I could give you a list of things you could go do, but I think deep in your heart and in your mind, you know what kindness looks like. You know what it means to be kind, and now it just takes us, with the help of the Holy Spirit, to be kind to people around us. Again, if you want to know kindness, know Jesus. If you want to look for kindness, look to Jesus. And for us, to be kind is to be like Christ. As followers of Jesus, this should be one of the most important things to us. I want to end with another quote from the book Wonder. It says this: "If every person in this room made it a rule that wherever you are, whenever you can, you will try to act a little kinder than is necessary, the world really would be a better place. And if you do this, if you act just a little kinder than is necessary, someone else, somewhere, someday may recognize in you, every single one of you, the face of God." Would you join me in prayer as I close? And I'll pray a blessing over you. And some of us hold out our hands as a sign of receiving that. And at this time, let me pray a blessing over you. May you know the one that showed loving kindness first. Would you know the one who knows you completely and loves you fully? And may our response be to be kind to those around us. Would we be the kind of people who put on display the loving kindness so that others may see God? You are now sent to love God and to love people and to serve our community. Love you guys.